Welcome. Almost everyone encounters people in life whose presence seems to create tension rather than ease. Sometimes it appears in small ways. A conversation that leaves you feeling unsettled long after it ends. A comment that lingers in the mind, or a sense that certain interactions quietly drain your energy. Other times the experience is more obvious, when someone's behavior feels sharp, dismissive, or difficult to understand. Have you ever noticed how a single interaction can echo in the mind for hours afterwards, as though the conversation continues long after it has actually finished? Many people assume that dealing with difficult personalities requires finding the right strategy for managing them, correcting them, or somehow changing their behavior. Yet when viewed through the lens of Buddhist thought, the situation often appears slightly different. Rather than focusing on how to reshape another person, the attention shifts toward understanding how the mind responds to the encounter itself. In this way, interactions with difficult people can become an opportunity to observe some of the deeper patterns that influence human relationships. One insight that often emerges from Buddhist teachings is the idea of compassion without attachment. Compassion, in this sense, does not mean approving of harmful behavior or accepting treatment that feels unkind. Instead, it refers to recognizing that every person carries their own set of struggles, fears, and conditioning. When someone behaves in a difficult or reactive way, it may simply reflect the pressures they themselves are carrying. Seeing this does not require agreeing with their actions, yet it can sometimes soften the instinct to immediately judge or retaliate. Have you ever noticed how differently a situation feels when another person's behavior is seen as part of their own difficulty rather than something directed entirely at you? A second reflection involves the simple but often overlooked reality that other people cannot be controlled. The mind sometimes believes that if the right words are chosen, or the perfect explanation is offered, another person will eventually understand and change their behavior. Yet human beings rarely shift in response to someone else's expectations alone. Each person moves according to their own experiences and perspectives. From a Buddhist viewpoint, much frustration arises when the mind quietly insists that other people should behave differently than they do. What happens when that expectation loosens slightly? Sometimes a surprising amount of tension fades when the mind recognizes that another person's behavior ultimately belongs to them, not to us. Another lesson that often appears in Buddhist practice is the difference between reacting and responding. When an interaction feels uncomfortable or confrontational, the mind can quickly produce an emotional response. Anger, defensiveness, or irritation can arise almost automatically, sometimes before there has been time to reflect on what is actually happening. Yet Buddhist teachings often emphasize the space between stimulus and response. In that brief space, even if it lasts only a few seconds, there is an opportunity to notice what is happening internally. The breath may slow, the mind may step back slightly, and a response can emerge that is calmer and more deliberate. Have you ever experienced a moment when pausing, even briefly, changed the entire tone of an interaction? There is also an insight within Buddhism that sometimes distance itself can be a form of wisdom. Many people grow up believing that maintaining harmony requires enduring every situation and maintaining connection at all costs. Yet relationships, like all aspects of life, exist within the changing conditions of impermanence. Some connections grow stronger over time, while others naturally loosen or fade. Recognizing this does not necessarily mean cutting people out of life entirely. Sometimes it simply means allowing a little more space where closeness once existed. In certain situations, a respectful distance can protect peace without creating hostility. Have you ever noticed how certain relationships feel lighter when the pressure to maintain constant proximity is allowed to dissolve? A final reflection concerns the idea of protecting one's inner peace. In Buddhist practice, peace of mind is not viewed as something fragile that must be defended against the world, but rather as something that becomes clearer when the mind loosens its grip on conflict. When interactions with difficult people arise, the mind often becomes absorbed in replaying conversations, imagining responses, or trying to resolve situations that may not actually be resolvable. Yet the mind also has the ability to return its attention to the present moment. The rhythm of breathing, the sensation of the body sitting quietly, the simple awareness of the surrounding environment can sometimes bring the mind back from the storm of mental replay. Over time, this return to the present moment can gradually weaken the hold that difficult encounters have over the mind. Seen in this way, difficult people may not always be obstacles in life, though they can certainly feel that way in the moment. Instead, they sometimes reveal patterns that might otherwise remain hidden. They highlight how easily the mind becomes entangled in reaction, expectation, and emotional turbulence. When these patterns are recognized, even gently, they can become opportunities for understanding rather than ongoing frustration. Of course, this does not mean that every difficult relationship becomes harmonious or that every conflict disappears. Human relationships are complex, and not every situation resolves neatly. Yet, Buddhist insight often points towards something quieter than resolution, a gradual change in the way the mind holds these experiences. Instead of carrying the weight of every difficult interaction, the mind may slowly learn to observe, to soften, and sometimes to let certain tensions pass without holding on to them. And perhaps this is where a different kind of freedom begins to appear. Not the freedom that comes from changing everyone around us, but the freedom that grows when the mind no longer feels compelled to fight every uncomfortable moment. Sometimes the presence of difficult people simply becomes another part of the changing landscape of life, something that arises, unfolds, and eventually passes like many other experiences. In the end, dealing with difficult people may not always be about finding the perfect response or solving the interaction entirely. Sometimes it is simply about seeing more clearly how the mind reacts and discovering that within that awareness there is a little more space, a little more patience, and perhaps a little less tension than before. If you found this video helpful and you'd like to support this space, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you for being here, and take care of yourself.